They told me the neighborhood was safe. They told me Mark and Diane were family friends, that Charlie was a quiet 5-year-old who loved trains. I believed them. I was 15, proud to have my first paid babysitting job, and the idea of danger was one of those things that belonged to late-night TV, not to a living room with a llama nightlight and a bowl of cereal on the coffee table. If you like true stories told straight, hit like and stay with me for all 3. I remember the house, creamy paint, the kind of hallway that smelled faintly of vanilla and laundry detergent, a crooked picture of a sailboat above the couch. They gave me a list: dinner at 6, bedtime routine at 8, call if anything came up. Charlie's room had a small nightlight that made soft shapes on the ceiling and a sliding closet door that didn't quite close all the way. He insisted on a little board game after dinner, and he hummed under his breath while he played, an ordinary, oddly comforting soundtrack. At first, it was a normal night. Diane kissed Charlie and waved at me before she left. Mark promised to text when he got home from work, and I turned on the living room lamp to make the house look lived in. I remember thinking how tiny responsibility felt. Tuck a kid in, check the locks, watch a movie. I put the dishes away, listened for the microwave's faint click, and felt that small, smug glow of doing something grown-up. 30 minutes after I put Charlie to bed, he called from the hallway. "Can you stay?" he said, voice thin in the doorway. He stood there clutching his blanket with his lips pinched. When I asked why he couldn't sleep, he pointed to the closet. "Someone's in there," he whispered. I smiled because that's what you do when a kid says something scary. Smile and say it's okay. I knelt by his bed and said I'd check it. I slid the closet doors open. The shelves were tidy, trains lined up like soldiers, a sweatshirt hung from the bar. Nothing moved. I shut the door, told him I'd stayed in the hall until he fell asleep, and sat in the dark for a while, listening to him breathe. I told myself maybe he'd dreamed it. Kids dream. That's what adults tell themselves. An hour later, I heard the closet door shift. Quiet at first, the sound was like fabric slipping or the quiet drag of a hanger. My stomach went cold. I stood up fast, the way you stand when something in a nightmare is suddenly real. The closet was partially open. This time I saw the hem of a shoe, then an arm, then the outline of someone crouched behind a laundry hamper, pressed into the shadow where the closet met the wall. There was no time to think grand thoughts about heroism. I grabbed Charlie, pulled the blanket over his shoulders, and felt his heartbeat stuttering against my palm. I closed his bedroom door, turned the deadbolt, and then I checked the top bolt and found it undone. The front door, I later learned, had been left unlocked too. Mark had only used the lower lock earlier that evening. One lock, one tiny oversight that made a wedge for real danger. I locked both locks, but I didn't leave the kids alone. I carried Charlie down the hall to the guest room, where there was another door between us and the rest of the house, and I locked that one too. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm and efficient, asking me where I was, how many people were in the house, whether anyone was injured. I said no, then explained who was in the closet. I heard sirens like a distant animal rising up. The police swept the house. They methodically checked every room and corner, flashlights cutting through laundry and dust motes. They told me later they found fresh footprints near the sliding closet and used the front door to slip out because the lower lock had been unlocked. No one was in the house when they finished the sweep. The officers talked quietly with Mark and Diane when they rushed back. They thanked me, patted my shoulder. They said, "Good job, you did everything right." Their faces were serious in a way that made me feel younger than 15 and older than any 15-year-old should. Afterward, Diane hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. Mark's gratitude was steady and a little stunned. Charlie curled into my lap and asked, very small, "Did the bad man go away?" I told him yes, but my throat was raw. I stayed until they got home for real. I cried once when I was alone, cleaning up the board game pieces, the pieces clacking against the box like a quiet confession. That was the first time I understood how petty and fragile the idea of safety could be. A single deadbolt left undone, a routine I didn't know to check. Those were all it took to turn an ordinary Saturday night into a police sweep. Later, when friends joked that I had ghost-hunted Mark and Diane's house, I wanted to laugh, but instead felt a hollow thrum under my ribs. A new wariness. That should have been a one-off. It wasn't. At 17, I was more cautious, but also more confident. Babysitting had paid for my first used phone and the zipper jacket I wore that winter. AJ's house felt familiar. I'd been there a few times, and his mother was warm in the practical way other people described as city tough. AJ himself had been oddly distant during my earlier visits. Quiet, thumb in his mouth, eyes that tracked too slowly. But kids change moods, and I went back because people paid me and because there's a particular kind of naivete at that age. You do it now because later you'll be glad you did. The first 2 evenings with AJ were normal enough. He read comics under the covers and asked for weird snack combinations. He peered around the doorway a lot, watching the TV with one eye, then slipping away like a cat that didn't want to be seen. At night, I slept in the living room on a thick couch, the TV a soft glow. I remember hearing the wind push at the windows and the hum of the refrigerator, ordinary house sounds that feel safe because you understand them. I woke up cold. AJ was sitting at the foot of the couch, silhouette small in the TV light. His hands were behind his back. For a weird second, I thought he was shy or pulling a prank. Then he turned. There was a knife in his hand, a kitchen knife. The blade caught the light and was suddenly a loud, obscene thing in the room. I felt a scream rise in me, raw and animal. My voice came out of me before I could process it. I yelled for AJ to drop it. Whatever plan he had, whatever had made his hands hide the knife, fell apart with my words. He didn't drop it at first. He just stood there, the knife held like something he needed to protect. My heart was banging so hard I thought it would punch through my chest. Part of me, a softer, stupider part, wanted to ask what was wrong. Another part knew better and moved on instinct. I locked the front door. I never locked the door before. I hadn't been thinking about doors as barriers against the people inside them. I called AJ's mother. Her voice on the phone was sharp and 2 things at once, furious and terrified. She said she'd be right there. She called someone else, an ex-husband or an ex-partner I'd been told about in passing, someone who arrived with wide, certain steps and took the knife from AJ's hands without drama. He wrapped AJ in a kind of heavy, flurried attention, and I left the house shaking so badly my legs felt like jello. I never babysat again after that night. That's the line that a lot of people mark in life, the moment you decide never to do something again. Mine came with the image of a small hand holding a kitchen knife under the blue light of a late-night TV, a sight that lodged itself in my memory and refused to soften. For a long time I replayed the scene and thought about the what-ifs. What if I hadn't woken? What if his hands had been in a different place? Those questions are cruel because they have no payoff. They only hollow you out. If you think that was the worst, wait for the second one. And then there's the third that makes you question everything you used to take for granted. By the time I was 21, babysitting had stopped being a job and become something I did for family. My sister, Emma and Lucas's mum, needed a night shift while she worked late. Emma was 6, Lucas was 9. They were my niece and nephew, and with family, danger felt even more remote. I told myself that because I was blood, the universe would be kinder. I had a tone of authority then. Adults listened differently to family. They were both asleep when I first heard the whisper. A voice, soft, close, saying good night in an odd cadence. Emma later said it sounded like someone trying out words. Lucas said the same. Someone had come into their rooms. At first I chalked it up to imagination. Kids make noises up, apartments creak, but there was more. I went upstairs with my phone flashlight and a ridiculous, pitiful courage. I held the knife from the kitchen in my hand because at that point it was the only thing I thought to arm myself with. I had no intention of confronting anyone. The knife was a talisman that made me feel less exposed. The house smelled like baby powder and cereal, the hallway carpet soft under my feet. I opened Emma's door and froze. There was a tall man in the corner, bent low like someone trying not to be seen. He was huge, at least 6'4", and his presence was wrong in a way I could feel in my teeth. He looked at the small bed where Emma slept and said, in a voice that made my skin crawl, "Aren't they just so special?" It was the wrong phrase for the wrong person to say about a sleeping child. He had a casual, almost fond tone that made coldness bloom in my chest. I didn't stand there. I ran, because running felt like the only smart thing to do. I grabbed both kids, pulled sheets and blankets around them, and we went out into the yard to the neighbor's porch. The neighbor took us in without question, gave us towels, and called 911. From the porch, I watched him walk out of the house as if he were leaving for a morning jog, arms swinging, no hurry, and then disappear down the street before the police arrived. The police told us they were sorry, that they did everything they could, that perps sometimes leave before they get there. They suggested cameras. Afterward, the family put in cameras, front porch, back door, hallway, and we slept at my parents' house that night. I felt angry, not just scared, but a tight, hot resentment at the idea that someone could step into a private space and move through it like it belonged to him. The slow arrival of help felt like a betrayal. I remember counting minutes like a person counting teeth, each one a small, brittle thing. What tied these 3 nights together isn't just the horror. It's the way each incident stripped away assumptions. The first was a lesson about locks and listening to kids. The second was the reminder that danger can be right in front of you, in someone you thought you knew. The third showed me how vulnerable a home can feel even when it's filled with people who love you. I want to pause here and say something important. None of the children did anything wrong in any of these stories. They noticed things. They said things. They were right when they were small and afraid. If you're a parent or a babysitter watching this and thinking, maybe I should have acted differently, don't do that to yourself. Fear is not a moral failing. Hesitation is human. Acting under adrenaline is messy, and that's okay. These stories aren't a test of perfect choices. They're about paying attention, making safer choices when you can, and knowing whom to call when you can't. The aftermath of those nights followed me for years. I stopped taking babysitting jobs entirely. I had nightmares, not the kind that resolve into morning, but ones that left residue in the day. I found myself checking locks obsessively, walking to the front door 3 times before I'd sleep at someone's house. I sometimes sat with a friend and realized we were talking about trivial things, while shadows on the walls made my chest tighten for no reason I could explain. The world felt smaller. Places that once felt safe became questionable. Police response felt at times like a lifeline with knots. In the first story, the officers were quick and efficient. In the third, they were later than I wanted. That discrepancy doesn't make the police heroes or villains. It makes them human and limited. It also made me aware of the importance of neighborhood networks and community awareness. The neighbor who opened their door to us on the porch in the third story became someone we would knock on without shame. I learned to name certain houses as places I could go if I needed to get out fast. There are practical things I did afterward. Not as a list of rules to live in fear, but as simple precautions that give you options when the unusual happens. Double-check locks. That deadbolt at the top of the door matters. Use both locks. It's mundane, almost boring, but it stops some things from becoming worse. Listen to kids. They notice small things adults don't. They'll tell you if a closet moved or someone said goodnight. Don't dismiss them as just imaginative. Ask questions calmly. Take what they say seriously. Have emergency numbers ready. Put them in your phone's favorites. Police, parents, a neighbor. Know who lives nearest, who you'd be comfortable knocking on if you needed a place to go. Plan an exit. Know where you'd go if you had to leave right now. A neighbor's porch, a friend's car, the front of the house. Having a mental exit reduces the paralysis when something goes wrong. Use technology where you can. Cameras don't make you invulnerable, but they create records. They gave my family a feeling of control after the third night. Whether it's a doorbell camera or a simple phone left where you can watch the hallway, sightlines help. Call the authorities early. Don't wait for something to escalate if there's concrete reason to be concerned. They're trained for these things, and having an official record matters for prevention. I also want to talk about the emotional work, because precautions don't erase what happened. It takes time to trust being alone in a room again. It takes different work and different language, therapy, conversations with friends who listen, letting yourself say, "I was scared," without punishing that childlike admission. For me, it meant a long time of saying no to easy invitations, telling people the truth about why I wouldn't babysit anymore, and learning to accept that decision without guilt. That's allowed me to move forward without pretending nothing had happened. There were a few other lessons the years taught me. Don't glamorize confrontation. I made a lot of what-if videos in my head where I did heroic things. In the moment, courage looks different. It's often a quiet, quick decision to get kids out of a house, not a movie-style fight. Don't praise risky bravery in yourself or others. Praise survival and quick thinking. If an option is to call authorities and get people who are trained to deal with it, take that route. And finally, I learned to hold a small, soft gratitude for the people who stepped in. The officers who did a thorough sweep. The neighbor who took us in without questions. The parents who hugged me and didn't blame me. There was kindness in those nights too, if you looked for it between the shadows. If you're a babysitter, or the parent who hires one, or a teenager thinking of taking your first job, take a few simple steps. Make lists for each other. Agree on locks. Leave contact numbers in big text. Make a plan together. And if a child tells you something odd, take it as valid information and treat it like something you can act on. If you're watching this because you've had your own close call, I want you to know you're not alone. These stories change people. They tighten and they teach, but they don't have to harden you into a person who lives only in fear. There is balance to be found between caution and horror. Finding it takes time. I still think about those 3 nights. They occupy a corner of my life that is sharp and won't go away, but it no longer controls everything I do. I tell these stories because they happened, and because there's value in telling the truth plainly. There's value in reminding ourselves that homes can be unsafe, that kids often see what adults ignore, and that the smallest precautions sometimes save the largest amount of panic. If any part of this resonates with you, if you've got a babysitting story that rattled you or a close call you learned from, share it in the comments. There's a strange comfort in hearing other people's voices when they say, "Me too." And if you want more true accounts like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.